Hey everyone, Kegan here. I'm a revenue manager at Wheelhouse, and today I'm going to be diving into a portfolio that John DeRoulet, the head of onboarding at Wheelhouse, went into on his last video. We're going to look at some high-level metrics here and take a look at general trends for the portfolio itself, talk a bit about how I can get an idea for the market's seasonality, as well as look at some new listings and how I would go about setting those up, and then take a look at some larger homes, a group of homes in this portfolio that John didn't get to take a look at on the last call. I'll try my best to dictate what I'm thinking and what I'm doing, try not to scroll and jump around too much so that's easy to follow, and yeah, let's get into it. So currently I'm on the bookings page for this portfolio, and I don't know this portfolio too well, so I need to kind of dive in and get an idea of what I'm working with here. Right now I'm looking at Charleston, but if I go ahead and remove this filter, I can then scroll down to the bottom here and look at each market individually. So we have Charleston, Cedarville, Hickory, and then Lake Norman. Okay, cool. So we have these different markets within the portfolio itself. For now, let me just take a look at Charleston. I know there's a lot of work that was done in the last couple weeks on pricing, and so we'll look at this as our first group. So what I'm looking at here on the bookings page is I'm looking at book nights at a daily level. I do prefer book nights, mainly because if I'm looking at any individual day, so let's look at April 19th, for example, I can see the total number of nights booked is 49 out of 77 total listings. Whereas if I switch this to occupancy, it becomes a little bit harder for me to understand. Obviously the percentage makes sense, right? But it's harder for me to understand how many more properties I have left to sell, right? 77% is a pretty decent occupancy number, but for me, it's harder to know exactly how much more I have to sell, right? Whereas if I switch this back to book nights, I know that out of the 77 total properties, I've booked 49, right? So I have, 28 left to book, right? So a little bit easier to look at. That's kind of my rationale for that. I've also overlaid ADR onto this chart as well, and I've removed fees. So if you are ever on the bookings page, just know if you want to look at just your rental rate, you can remove fees in the top right. Okay, so now I'm looking at this book nights with ADR at a daily level. What can this help me with? Well, first of all, I can sort of get an idea of the trends for the group and how occupancy is looking as we look all the way out towards a year. I can clearly see that March has been pretty occupied, even not a huge weekday differential, although there are some peaks here that I would of course probably attribute to weekends, but pretty flat across March, which is actually kind of interesting. And if you've watched John's previous video, and something he noticed was some blocks in occupancy, not actual blocks, like bricks of occupancy in the March date range, whereas when we're looking at July from a market's perspective, it was pretty variable between weekend and weekday. Now this may be due to spring break and people generally booking slightly longer length of stay, which we could dive into as well. So just something I noticed, pretty flat. And we can see as we move forward a much starker difference between weekday and weekends here. Especially in early April, huge jump off here in occupancy. We can see sort of this cliff here where it falls off and then picks back up in the middle of April, drops off again, picks back up. What I like about the shape I'm seeing here is that we have a slow curve down as we move forward in time. I prefer this over seeing a large cliff or a large drop off outside of the month to 3 week window. For example, if after April 6th, this occupancy continued to trend downward, that wouldn't be ideal, right? But I like how I'm seeing a slow, gradual turn And this to me says that we have a good base of business once we're well within the red zone, or no time left to sell, that 30-day window roughly, depending on the property type. We have a good base of business, and I can actually look to hit a sellout, which obviously is ideal. So just a general observation on the shape and trend of the chart here. A couple other things I noticed. In the last 7 days, there's been a lot of activity, especially within this 2-month window, right? Today is March 13th, and we can see a ton of pickup or book nights all the way out into May, and even extending for far out. We've seen some bookings occurring even in the far future. Another way you can see this is if I actually just remove total and just highlight the pickup in the last 7 days. We can see a majority of that is occurring at the end of March for Easter weekend. Then right behind it is the middle of April, and then pretty even throughout the rest of April and then May, and then kind of drops off here at the end of May, and we do see a spattering of pickup further out. So those are good signs. There's a lot of adjustments to pricing made last week and the week before, and so this kind of shows me in the last 2 weeks and last week that those adjustments are actualizing. It's, to me, sort of a cause and effect relationship. If I've made any adjustments across the board or to specific date ranges, I really like to highlight that and see if anything's occurred within these buckets of time. Now, of course, this is the market as a whole, so what I would further look to do is narrow down what I'm looking at. Okay, so let's go ahead and just look at the studios and one beds within Charleston. And this is going to be something that's different for every portfolio. And I don't know this one super well yet because it's just my first day kind of exploring it. But segmentation is a huge part of looking at and addressing any needs for your property. So just narrowing this down to the studios and one beds brought me down to 17 listings here. We can see in the last 7 days there's been quite a bit of activity for these property types, extending basically all the way out into early June here, and we did get a solo night booked all the way in November for the studios and one beds. But one thing I noticed right away is that the length of the pickup on this chart is much shorter for these studios and one beds, which is to be expected, right? Now, I think John did discover that the start of the booking window for the one beds and two beds was actually pretty similar for July at least. So that was about at 90 days. So we're actually getting to the time where I would actually expect maybe the one beds to start picking up into July, and then definitely into June, as we already have started to see in the last 2 weeks, actually towards the end of June, starting to see some pickup here. But that's just one observation. So very clearly the booking window is shortened here, and we are definitely hitting a lot of sellouts here. Now there are some multi-unit properties here, because you can see the occupancy is higher than the number of listings I have, but we have some multi-unit properties. So there's obviously some parent-child listings going on there. A couple things I want to check in on just from looking at this. One is the big gap in occupancy right before Easter weekend. I want to check in on that and see where our posted rates are at. I'm sure there's been adjustments made already, and we can actually see in the last 7 days how this has started to fill in. Let's see, and even in the last 3 days, some bookings have come in, but that's something I want to check on it. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over to another tab to do that. So I'm going to hop over to the portfolio calendar here. I'm just going to set up my filters to be the same as what I was looking at on the bookings page. So same market, and let's look at the studios and one beds. Let's see, I'm just hopping back here. So let me zoom in. I'm just going to left click and drag here. This is the 30th and the 31st. So let's scroll here. Let me move my face. Interestingly enough, the 30th is a Saturday here, and the 31st is this Sunday. So we can see quite a few gap nights here, with a couple one-sided gaps with the weekend still left to sell on some of these properties. And it looks like some adjustments were made. We can see that these prices were decreased pretty recently. And so I may not since someone else has gone in and adjusted things, I may not actually touch these quite yet. But if they hadn't been, I would go in and maybe make some adjustments, manually intervene. You know, the recommendations are, you know, within, what is this, low 200s to low 300s, and maybe they've been sitting there, you know, at those rates for a while, so I would go in and manually intervene. In this case, I'm going to wait because those adjustments were made. But what's great about the bookings page is in another 3 to 7 days, I can come back and actually check in on this date range and see, you know, in the short term, has this impacted our pickup? And then maybe week over week, has it impacted the pickup as well? Another thing I'm going to look at while we're here is within this group of properties, I actually want to see if any of these are just struggling in general. So one thing we can do is this column here is called last booked. Literally just tells you the last time a listing was booked. Now context is key with this metric, of course. We can actually see 2 stark examples here of this. The last time this listing was booked was 2 months ago. The occupancy coming up is very low, so 0% in 30 and 90 days. This listing, last time it was booked 2 months ago, but we are highly occupied, and even has a block within the gaps that aren't. Oh, I see. This is just blocked. Never mind. So this property is just blocked, obviously unbookable for whatever reason. Not sure on that. So this one may be one we want to check in on. This was adjusted down quite a bit pretty recently. So this is another one that if it hadn't already been brought down via calendar override, it's something I would want to intervene on. This is maybe a new property, I'm not quite sure, and it may just be in, you know, what's called a lease up period, where essentially you just need to drop the rate position in the short term, typically within the first couple months, and just try to acquire bookings at a lower cost, ensure, you know, good value for what guests are paying, hopefully get good reviews, turn keys. And this also, you know, it depends on what season you're into, of course. This is very important right now. Obviously, we're in the high season within March, but it's very important when we're looking ahead at July, right? We want to make sure this listing isn't just sitting vacant and not acquiring any reviews or any traction on OTAs, because once we hit in July, we want to make sure that it's been performing pretty strong and we have the capability to actually sell it. Now, that being said, I'm going to open up this property real quick in an individual tab just to take a look here and see how it's set up. All right, one thing I noticed right away that makes a lot more sense is this listing is not even turned on for pricing. So it's not even having this pricing pushed out. So it's something we'll want to obviously, once it's turned on, monitor. But it's my point in looking at the setup and monitoring how it's actually posted. It doesn't really matter right now because it's not actually live yet. So, but let's just actually take a look here and see how this is set up. So it's a 1 bed, 1 bath. The base price is set to the recommended of 200. The rate position definitely elevates, especially into July. We can see we're peaking here in the 4th of July. If this property was turned on, I would significantly reduce the rate position within the short term. Now, I wouldn't do this by actually changing the base price because as you can see, when I do modify a base price, it brings the whole calendar down. And that's not necessarily what I want to do with a new property. I might not quite know the rate position or the performance level of the property, but I don't want to risk underselling my far future dates for a new nice property by just bringing down the rate position across the whole calendar. So for this property, I would actually do what someone else has already done, would be go to the calendar and bring down the rate position quite a bit. I may even opt to, in the short term, once the property's live, actually just take the dates for this property for like the next month and just manually intervene and set some fixed pricing that doesn't change based off demand. I would go in and literally set in a low fixed rate position just to hopefully help secure some bookings in the last minute to start turning keys and get those reviews to set me up for success later. All right, let's hop back to the bookings page real quick and take a look at any other areas that we may want to look at here. So I'm actually just going to zoom in a bit since we don't have much outside of May. I'm going to zoom in on this specific time frame here. So we're seeing quite a bit of activity for these properties within this like 2-month window. And I already addressed this. Looks like that's good. We definitely see a lull and pick up here. I might actually take a look at this weekend here in April, just to see where we're sitting. So this weekend here in particular is pretty vacant. The rates are being elevated pretty aggressively. And let me move my face here. Pretty aggressive, but not like too much higher than even the previous weekend. But some of these properties are being raised up pretty high. This is a weekend I may look to adjust just because I'm seeing sort of this shape, right? So the beginning of April, pretty occupied, dips back down, but that dip doesn't continue. It actually dips back up and we see an increase for the weekend after as well. So this to me may indicate that we may need to try to bring these down a little bit. Now we are also within the 30-day window for this weekend too. So that's an even further indication that I want to start trying to bring down the rate position. Now, of course, the model and any settings that are already set for this can do that. So that's something I want to check real quick is for these properties, what the last minute discounting structure looks like. Let's take a look here. So it looks like there's quite a few set up here. Looks like March is included in this one. So significant decrease to rates within 10 days from March, pretty significant within 15, pretty significant within 25, and then within 30, we're actually going down 20%. So we're right at the cusp of these basically being brought down via that last minute discount setting. So I'm not going to be too aggressive with my adjustments because I don't want to over drop these, but I am going to go in and just show how I would do this. I'm just going to do a very slight decrease to start with. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've just selected my dates by clicking and dragging. Then I've actually held control to select all the listings I want instead of clicking this little box over here. As you can see, it was much faster. I got to select the ones that are open and vacant on these dates. And then what I'm going to do is, since someone has already gone in and adjusted some of these listings down already, and I don't want to remove that completely, is I'm going to select make adjustment. I'm actually just going to bring everything down an additional 5%. I'm not being too aggressive here because we have a setting in place that's going to be aggressive for me with the discounting, and it kind of automates that. But I am a bit concerned because the surrounding dates are fairly occupied, and this one is definitely a bit lower. Now, the good news to me is that we are seeing some activity here based off of those slight adjustments or the settings already bringing them down. So that's good. It's a good sign. So I'm not going to be too aggressive. Mainly just wanted to show how I do that if I did. All right, I'm not too concerned about April, at least from a pacing perspective. We can see we've had a lot of activity in the last 2 weeks and in the last week, and then even some pickup in the last 3 days. Something that odd to me here is this April 26th date range. This ADR is like $1,400 and the occupancy is super low. So that's kind of weird. So let me go ahead and look at the calendar here. Interesting. I don't see any reservations that came in at that rate. So let's take a look on this page. At the bottom, there's a reservations table, and it's sorted by stay date. Let me see, I need to get to April 26th. Lots of clicking here. Okay. April 26th. Okay, whatever this property is, whatever that property is, clearly has, I don't know, some sort of weird booking going on. So I'm going to look this one up here. I'm going to pause while I search for the name. All right, I've gone ahead and pulled up this listing and went to the individual reservations page and found this reservation. Clearly something weird going on here. I don't know if this was supposed to be a block that is booked on the PMS as a reservation. So that's something I would want to ping the team on and take a look into that, right? Because that seems like an anomaly, and just point that out. So I'm going to take a note of that real quick. And then we'll investigate it, right? So anomalies happen, weird things happen, so we'll take a look at that later. sometimes you find interesting and weird Easter eggs as you're looking at things, and you'll have to just deal with them as they come. So that makes sense. I'm really liking how much we've been picking up here in early May. Now it's pretty aggressive in the last 7 days. If you look at the length or the number of nights in the last 7 days for that day range, it's in line and even better than a lot of dates within the short term. So that's something I want to check in on. Early May, are we priced relatively aggressive? Let me do this too, because it can be kind of a lot to look at. Let me just turn off this demand heat map for a second. Early May, no price increases. Some of these properties got some adjustments a few days ago, so I think some of these may have seen those come to fruition because of those adjustments. And it looks like rates are already pretty aggressive here in early May. Now this could be an event occurring here. Sorry, let me move my face again. Very aggressive here in the second weekend of May. This weekend, not quite, but still pretty good. Let's see here. Do we have good historicals? Yeah, that's something, since I don't know these properties as well, same time last year, functionality is not going to be as useful to me, but it's something that can be helpful. I may look to actually push pricing in this date range a bit more. Because the pickup here, if I zoom in, has been really strong in the last 7 days. And then even in the last 3 days, we've seen a decent amount. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some micro adjustments, kind of like what I did earlier for the weekend in April. And let's see, where do I want to start this? Sorry, I'm having to jump back quite a bit here. Basically, I want to start this very end of April and right about to May 6th. That's kind of that band of time that we're seeing a pretty aggressive amount of pickup in the last week. So I'm going to start this here on April 29th and to basically the 5th. Now what's interesting, with the demand heat map here turned on, we can actually see that the general market is also seeing some pretty aggressive demand in this time frame as well. So what I'll do here is I'll select my dates for one listing. So I've selected my date range, and then I'm actually just going to click select all. And it's going to select all the properties. And then I'm going to remove some that are already booked here. So remove these, and then these have some gaps, so I'll leave them in. And basically what I'm just going to do is I'm going to adjust things up. I'm going to go, let's see, 10%. Now that gets us pretty aggressive here on this weekend, but we're within that sort of time frame that I would consider like my peak experimentation with the rate time frame. Now if I'm going to make this change and then not come back and look at it for a month, 2 months, then that's obviously not good, right? So I'm going to be looking at this week over week and monitoring and using this bookings page and coming back in and saying, like, hey, after I made that change, how much did we pick up? We still continue pacing well? Awesome. That's great. Love to see it. Did pickup slow down? Okay, maybe I was a bit too aggressive. Let's bring things down a little bit more. Did rates change significantly? Those are considerations, right? So another thing I'm going to do too is I'm going to leave notes here. I'm going to say brought rate position up 10% based on pickup in the last 7 days being very strong. And then I'll put my name here. I'm going to attach this to the calendar so it shows up there. And then I'm going to set a reminder for Wednesday of next week to come back and look at this and update it. All right, let's take a look at the bookings page again and just see if there's any other areas I want to look in at. So this was incorporated in that last adjustment. This was already adjusted. One thing I'm kind of doing here is just like general shapes, right? So like peaks and valleys, very simple, very straightforward. Within that, you need to look at the time frames as well. How are you pacing week over week, and then even in the short term here. So that's kind of like the general idea when I'm looking at this. So I think I'm good with the studios and one beds here. I am curious. I want to maybe compare how they're picking up and booking to the 2-beds in the market as well. So let's take a look here. All right, let me do this. All right, after me misclicking and removing filters, I've gone ahead and set this up properly. So definitely less 2-beds than there are both studios and 1-beds. But actually, I'm kind of curious. I want to look at the 1-beds and 2-beds together because something John noticed. Actually, so there are no studios. I should have noticed that, I guess. It's only 1-beds within that group. So I am curious, though, because John did notice that, at least for July within the market, that the 2-beds and 1-beds sort of had a similar start of their major booking window. So I am curious to see if that is similar for the portfolio itself. And obviously there's more to sell of the 1-bed, so more opportunity to actually see those occur. But they're pretty much right in line as far as like length of booking window, with 1-bed's extending a bit far out, but I might attribute that to having almost double the number of listings within that group. So very similar length here, and it's not like the 2-beds extend incredibly far out into the summer already. So similar booking window, at least right now. So that's definitely interesting. So let me actually just set this up, and we're just going to look at the 2-beds by themselves here. And then I'll also set up my portfolio calendar to be in line with it as well. So let's pull in the rates here, reset my zoom. All right, so very similar as I noticed before with the comparison as far as booking windows go. And we are hitting sellouts, almost a sellout here. I imagine if I look at this, there's one property that's blocked. Okay, so that makes sense why we're not hitting that sellout. But considering that, we also have some other blocks here, but we are hitting pretty good occupancy within the short term, or at least we have been throughout March. And then our pickup occurring, we've been seeing in that first week here of April a lot in the last 7 days. And then not a huge difference between 14 and 7, so that tells me that the pacing has been picking up a bit. And then even in the last 3 days, this beginning April has been going pretty strong. So this is an indication to me maybe I need to check in on that early April date range. And we are completely sold out. Yeah, because that's 8 nights. Okay, that makes sense. So we have completely hit a sellout. So with that in mind, and with how end of April is looking, I might check in on the last weekend here and see. We do have this last property here. I think there's a broad adjustment made for this property. It looks like across the board we can see that adjustment here. I'm actually going to strip this decrease from this weekend. So I'm just going to go into dynamic, enter in 0, click save, and we can see that rate positions brought up. I'm going to leave a note, stripped rate decrease that was generally set for the listing for the weekend of 4/19 to 4/20. Would like to try and sell this high demand date at higher rate. So I'll leave my name, attach it to the calendar, set a reminder to check back in next week. Just because the rest of the properties are sold out and we're seeing very strong pacing here, and this is very dark blue, so even the rest of the market, based off of what Wheelhouse is seeing, is clearly picking up too. So I know this property was probably underperforming, and so there was just a general increase made, which is great. And let me actually take a look here. Sorry, moving my cursor a lot. Let's see, booked nights in the last 7 days is added right here. Okay. Yeah, so this property has seen a decent amount booked, only 4 nights actually. So not crazy across the board, but I would like to, if we can, try to push that, because we're just outside of the month. Once we hit next week, if we're not quite if we haven't sold it, I'm just going to start bringing that down again. Okay. Within the short term, let's go ahead and just double check here. Rates are being tanked pretty significantly. We can see these gaps are being brought down. One thing I'm noticing too for these 2 bedrooms is we have a lot of one-night gaps, but our length of stay is set to 2 nights. So this is a conversation I would have if it's possible operationally to just drop these and set a gap night rule to drop to 1 night in between stays. I would try to set that up if it is possible, because we have quite a few. Like, just scanning very briefly, you can see how many there are. So that would be something to help fill in those gaps. Obviously, it's not always possible depending on operations and the property type. But if it is, these properties would definitely benefit from it. It's pretty easy to set up too. I would just go to portfolio settings, select my properties, click edit on min stays, and then I would add a gap night rule, which would allow to drop to 1. I would just add that on top of all the other rules. Pretty easy. So that's one thing I noticed there. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some larger groups of properties here. I know we didn't get to look at them on John's call, so I want to open these up and take a look at these larger homes here. So let me reset this. Now there's not as many, right? I selected 7 different types and got 11 different listings. Let's do the same thing over here. So, oops, let's go. Now, these are going to be more unique, of course, and I might have to go into the individual setups for them. Let's see what we're looking at here. A couple 5s, couple 6s, couple 7s, and then 1 11 bedroom. These are set to more aggressive here, but let's go ahead and just take a look at the booking pacing and activity here. So actually a decent amount of activity in the last 7 days. And if one thing I like to look at too is if I remove total, let me hide ADR. If we look at the difference between last 14 and last 7, a majority of the pickup for these properties has occurred in the last 7 days. And it of course is extending all the way out into September, so even all the way out to 6 months, with a decent number of nights booked. Obviously, I would expect these listings to book much further out, so that's good to see. But to me, that possibly means that there were some, so there were some adjustments made in the last 7 days to these properties where the base prices were adjusted down. So this is actually a good example of when I would adjust the base price, is if a property just kind of across the board is too aggressive, and it's not just an issue in the short term, and if they're well established, right? If these properties have been around for a while and we're just noticing generally low performance, that's a good indicator to me just to bring down the overall rate position. So that makes sense here. So I like to see that. Some custom base prices set as well. So let's actually just take a look at the short term for the calendar here just to get an idea. Okay, interesting. These are all blocked. Did these continue? Not sure what's going on here. So that's something I would need to investigate further. Obviously, if I had been managing the portfolio for a while, I might know what's going on here, but who knows? So that's something I want to look into. But we do have some available dates. And I also wanted to get an idea of the minimum length of stay for these. So let me actually hop over to this. Okay, it looks like a global of 2. And then up to 4 nights and 5 nights on some dates. Okay, that makes sense. 2 nights set on weekdays here. That's for the 5-bed. Does the 11-bed have a similar setup? Let's see. A little bit more aggressive with the minimum stay for 11-bed. Okay, that's good to see. Okay, cool. So this is a good sign to me that in the last week, since just making a change to the base price has sort of allowed these to be not as aggressive further out. That's really good. Let's take a look at one of these ones that hasn't been booked for a while. So this one here was changed 7 days ago, but it still hasn't seen any bookings in the last 4 months. Now this one's probably, yeah, it is blocked quite a bit, but it's not blocked in the summer months. So this is something I would expect to start seeing some bookings here. Now this change was just made in the last 7 days, and it looks to be like, to me, that the previous pricing was pretty aggressive. We can see a pretty big difference. So if the base price hadn't been adjusted recently, I would go in and make further adjustments, but for now I think I would want to let this sit a bit longer with where it's at. So that seems okay to me. All right, definitely starting to see some peaks here. So we can see obviously early June and middle of June peaking here. Let's just take a look in these summer months for all the properties and see how they're priced here. Now that the base prices are adjusted and we're starting to see some of these peaks occur, I can go in. Oh, it looks like the base prices were adjusted, and also there was a general rate decrease set as well. In this note, it's 15% weekend. Oh, I see discounts in June. Okay. Okay, so let's see. We haven't seen anything the last 2 weeks here. This weekend, though, in particular, I'm going to look at. So June 21st. And how are we priced compared to surrounding weekends? It's kind of hard to look at. Let me get rid of this. We can see we're actually a bit more aggressive on the 14th. Not as aggressive in early June, but way more aggressive on the 14th here, especially for this 6-bedroom. The 6-bedroom is priced incredibly high and hasn't been booked for 2 months. Interesting. Let's take a look here. Base price is set to $1,900, and current settings are up in the 5,000. Let's see. Looks like there's some day of week adjustments. What did this property do last year? Has it been around? No, it hasn't been around. Okay. So this one's interesting. It doesn't have historicals, and it's blocked quite a bit, and it's priced incredibly high in the summer. And it hasn't been booking. Although it did book here, it looks like. What was that reservation? And the ADR was about 900, and that was for early June. So to me, this is probably indicating that the rate position is quite high. It booked at ADR of 900. We're currently posted at anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5,000. Okay, so this one, I would probably want to bring down this base price quite a bit. And monitor that. Now, it's harder to know because we are blocked in the upcoming dates, so it's hard to say what's going on there. I also would want to check in on these and see if these are actual blocks or if there's some sort of owner stay going on, or what's exactly going on here. But this one seems to be a bit overpriced based off of where it's currently sitting at and the fact that it hasn't been booking. Another thing I like about the setup for these properties is that when a booking occurs and splits a weekend, the minimum length of stay is auto dropping for the Friday night and also for the Thursday night. And if Thursday are booked, Saturday is auto dropping. I like this because it makes these dates more sellable and it automates it, right? I could go in and manually intervene. And if we take a look at the settings, this is done with the one-sided gap rules. Move my face. So under one-sided gap rules, we can see these 3 rules set up, basically saying before reservation, the prior 2 days, we could say 1 day, it doesn't have to be 2, but if Friday is booked up or Saturday is booked up, then Thursday is going to get dropped to 2 nights. And then the same for Friday. If Saturday is booked up, Friday will get dropped to 2 nights. And then if Sunday is booked up, Saturday will get dropped to 2 nights, which is actually interesting. I don't know if we want that per se, but that's something I'd want to think about here. Yeah, so that it makes sense to me if Saturday is booked up to drop Friday, if Friday is booked up to drop Thursday. But if Sunday is booked up, I don't know if I necessarily want to drop Saturday. This to me would be if Friday is booked, so I would say after unavailability, if Friday is booked, then Saturday will drop. So that's something I'd want to check in on with whoever set this up just to see if that makes sense, and then go through that and adjust it if needed. But I like that it automates it a bit. So outside of that, it's hard for these properties because we're pretty blocked and don't have much to sell really. And the main area that we're looking at that is open is in the summer months. And to me, it looked like some of these properties were just pretty overpriced, especially that 5-bedroom we were looking at earlier. But there have been some rate decreases in the last 7 days. So this is something, and we're seeing response. So it's something I'm not going to over engineer. If we came back in after these adjustments were made and in the last 7 days didn't see anything, then I might say, okay, we need to actually make further adjustments. But to me, we're seeing a response that cause and effect, which is good. One last thing I'm going to do just for the short-term optics is I'm going to filter for the whole market. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and say in the next 60 days, I only want to see listings that have like minimal blocks. And then within that filter, I'm going to sort. So I've already done it, but I'm going to sort here by last booked. And any properties that haven't been booked for a while and have low occupancy, just ensure they have further adjustments made. So this 1-bedroom here was definitely brought down, but I would say, it hasn't been booked in 2 months and the weekday rates look pretty low. But to me, we could probably go a bit further here on this weekend and this weekend here. So I'm going to go and make this a further adjustment. Let's see, what's the minimum price? Let me move my face. Minimum price. There is no minimum price. This property might not even be live. That's probably what's going on here. And yeah, this property is not even live. So, so that one doesn't matter. Let's go back and take a look. A lot of these have been booking quite a bit in the last week. So a lot of adjustments made, and we can see a ton of pickup, right? A lot of these are hitting their minimums. This one's not even bookable. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about these 1-night gaps, if we can drop them down. But generally looking like we're at the floor for the sellable nights in the short term, right? This inventory is expiring, and if it is sellable, I want to make sure it's at the lowest rate possible. So that's kind of what I did there by filtering out the block nights and taking a look at the short term. So just an overview. I mainly was focusing on using the bookings page to look at the trends and pacing for the upcoming months with the seasonality for the market in mind, and then going further by segmenting. We did look at the studio and 1-beds, compared them to the 2-bedrooms, and also took a little bit of a deeper dive into the larger property types as well. We did notice that the adjustments made to them via the base prices and calendar overrides, that we have seen quite a bit of activity in the last 7 days, especially within the non-blocked timeframes here in the summer months. And we also noticed that we may be a bit overpriced here in these months and need to check in on potentially lowering the base price down for those properties. And then also got to take a look at adjusting things on the calendar, how to filter down by those, how to sort as well, to give you more insight into or like granularity into the listings you're trying to look at as well. Over time, this becomes easier as you become obviously more familiar with the platform, but also knowing the portfolio better and the market better. You kind of get a feeling for where things should be at and what to expect once you're within your booking windows for various seasons as well. So hopefully this is helpful, but we'll continue doing them on a bi-weekly or monthly basis and posting these as we get them completed. Thanks.